All right, first off, thank you guys so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm super excited to talk to you guys about art production today. So we'll kick off. So the general talk here is about art production field guide. We're going to talk about 3 different topics that involves. To me, I broke it up into 3 sections. To have a successful art production, you have to have a successful pre-production. You cannot have a successful production run without that. And then obviously we will talk about there we go. We'll talk about production, obviously, from there. And then after that, there's a topic that if any of you guys have seen me talk about before that I'm I geek out about, but there's aspects of the production that aren't your pipeline. We're all creative humans, and we all have the squishy brain that doesn't quite work the same way that the computer software that we use works. So I wanted to talk about a few brain science stuff at the end. All right, so to kick off, I'll give you a quick introduction of who I am, just to give you some background and some context, so to maybe some of the things that I talk about are based on my experiences. That doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. I'm sure there's better ways of doing it, and I'm sure you guys are going to figure out better ways of doing it, but this is sort of a talk about the things that I've seen and experienced along my path. I started, my background is in art. So I was a character animator, a texture artist, a VFX person. I did a little bit of cinematic stuff, but mainly a character artist for Area 51. Then DC Universe, I switched over to the outsourcing side of things. I was able to basically connect. Sony Online had this big DC Universe project, and they're like, hey, we should outsource. Go. I was like, oh, crap, I don't know what I'm doing. So we set up a team internally of about 4 people and about 50-ish external, and we created about 30% of the assets for DC Universe. For Army of Two, I was an environment art producer. So I helped help the teams create a bunch of levels for that project. Then I missed outsourcing, and Blizzard called and they said, hey, we were building this big game called Titan, and we should probably outsource for it. And so I joined, actually they didn't tell me it was Titan, so I joined Blizzard without knowing what I was joining. So I walked in, so the first time my first day in the job, I walked in to see Project Titan, which soon evolved and became Overwatch. We built an internal team of about 4 people internal, and we worked with 16 teams around the world, and that was about 60-ish people around the world to help us create assets for Overwatch. Everything you see in the levels that's not nailed down, that was created by someone outside of the Blizzard offices. That was run through my team, which was super exciting. There's all sorts of folks all over the world that contributed to that. About half the skins at launch, maybe a little bit less, maybe about a third of the skins at launch were outsourced as well, and a few animations, which was super exciting. And then I joined Riot Games, and so then my job there was to support the outsource managers already at Riot. So they were working on League of Legends, and there's some other projects going on, but my job was to then think back to my Overwatch days and say, what support would I wanted back then, and carry that over and support the outsource managers at Riot. So the interesting part, so now, I am now independent, and the cool part for me is now I can help everyone. So I can help, hopefully the concept is I'm able to help all of the studios that make these awesome games, as well as anyone here in the audience, help make games, help make more games, help make connections to help make games. So it's exciting to me to not be necessarily connected to one project, but I miss all of those folks. Every team that I've worked with has been amazing. It's kind of insane. I feel very fortunate. So that's my background. Let's jump into it. So the first topic is pre-production. We need to have a successful pre-production we need to set up production for success, and we do that by properly building your pre-production pipeline. So there's a few things that sort of pop up to me as key points. The first one is this concept of OODA loop. There is John Boyd, he was a US Air Force pilot. He developed basically a decision-making process for fighter plane combat. So these guys are in high-stress situations. How do you make decisions in that kind of world? Which I think is actually, you can carry over to games because we've all got these crazy deadlines and we're trying to ship this very creative project. So we don't have to go through this whole thing, but what I wanted to call out here is that the basic concept is to observe the situation, and this is a process that I think is very useful throughout pre-production. As you're iterating through pre-production, I hope that you can use these sort of steps to orient yourself. So the general idea is observe the situation, observe your problems, take all that information you learned, sort of organize it and package it up, and then decide what you're going to do. After you decide what you're going to do, you actually act. And so this sounds very simple and basic, but just the concept of slowing the process down to these steps, no matter what challenge is in front of you, whether you're making a mobile game or a console game or you're handling character animation or visual effects, you can sort of run through a process like this to set up your pre-production. One of the big ones that I've seen a lot is, and that's super important, is to have a pre-production target. When you start to make a game, make sure that you have a plan for what kind of questions you want answered before you enter production. You're basically designing an engine. During pre-production, you get to move all of the important pieces of the engine around, but once you exit production, you're going to turn that key, and that engine is either going to run amazing, it's going to run rough, or it's going to destroy itself. And I think you only get sort of one turn of that key. So that building process is pre-production. So have a target. What do you want to build? What does it look like? How many, what questions do we have answered? Is it, I'm going to have one level with 3 characters and 2 weapons, and I'm going to have art direction locked down. I'm going to have X number of illustrations, whatever. It's up to you to define that, but to define that at the beginning. Don't just enter pre-production and sort of stumble around, because I think if you have a target that you're going towards, there's at least a line in the sand. And don't modify it, because then all of a sudden if you get to the end, you're like, oh, I built 1 level, but we still need to figure out this stuff. Let's build a 2nd level. Then you get stuck in this pre-production cycle. I've seen so many teams at every one of the large studios that I've been at get stuck in this pre-production iteration cycle because they didn't have a clear goal to exit pre-production. So have a target going into it. It'll help you exit pre-production and actually start to make a game. So the first one is, another big point in pre-production is defining what good looks like. And there's a few steps to that. So I break it down into sort of 3 topics. Your what good looks like, so it's an asset. It's a level, it's a character, it's a weapon. But your what good looks like should represent the quality of the asset, right? The technical construction, it should be built the right way, or have all the right maps, roughly the right poly count, all that sort of stuff. And it should have taken you, it's going to take you a little bit longer the first time. But you should be able to look at that and go, I can build that in 3 days, and that's a sustainable process for the rest of the game. So going back to sort of defining each one a little bit more. So quality is the level of craft, how good is your painting on the textures, how good is the animation, and does it match the style? Does this piece represent the style of art that you're trying to represent for this game? And if not, fix it. Make sure it represents that. In Overwatch, one of the things, it was funny, we were told to outsource a bucket. That was the first asset. If you ever see that bucket in Cairo, that was the first ever asset we outsourced. And that one little bucket took us 2 months. It was crazy. Because it said, okay, start outsourcing. It's like, okay, do we know what unpainted metal looks like? I go, no, we've done just painted metal. It's like, well, we need to figure out what unpainted metal looks like. We should have figured that out before, but we figured that out in the outsourcing process. If we had done our pre-production correctly, we would have known what unpainted metal looks like. So anyway, quality, level of craft style, technically, obviously, poly counts, map sizes, it should be named correctly. So if I handed you this asset and didn't explain anything about it, if you could look at that and go, I get it, I know what you want to build. And if I said I want 10 more of those, you would, sweet, I got it. And then effort, how much time does it take to build this thing? Are you building an asset for a 4K screen for a console or PC, or are you building it for mobile? The amount of effort that it would take changes pretty drastically. Your technical process. Did the technical process that you followed to make this asset, is that the same that you would use in production? If it's not, then fix it. Fix it in pre-production. Don't wait until production to answer those questions. Answer it now, or else you'll get yourself in trouble later. And then automation. How much of your process is automated? Are you having to spend a lot of time and effort doing something that maybe should be automated? Do that in pre-production. Start, even if you don't finish the tools to automate your process, start them. Define what the tools will do and start those in pre-production. All right, so the next one, which I think is hugely important. So I quickly moved into sort of the outsourcing world. I'm not going to be able to take that off. I quickly moved into the outsourcing world, and when I ask someone outside of the building to build an asset, I have to tell them the phases that I want them to deliver it in. Internal projects don't always define that, and I think that internal teams could benefit from that a lot. So this is just one example of phases, but this will be up to you to define. So if you're making concept or illustration, your phases will be very different. But define the sub-steps of building an asset. Okay, so this is the rough phases for the props for Overwatch. So we want a concept. After we get a rough concept, we do a block out. After we get the block out, we do a paint over of the block out to sort of represent the style and the level of dirt and rust and all that sort of stuff. Then we do high poly, low poly, UVs, and then we wouldn't do UVs and texture at the same time because we wanted to make sure that we sort of signed off on the UVs. Textures and then tech meshes were basically stuff like bullet collision and occluders and stuff like that. But you don't do that until the end because your asset could change. But this is an example. But create phases beforehand and during pre-production, and then stick to them during production. We'll talk a little bit more of that later. The other big one here is we talked about what good looks like for like the final asset, but it's also super important to have what good looks like for each step in the process. I can't tell you how many times I sent out a what good looks like prop, and I said, okay, I need 10 of these, and it's like, and then I said, okay, start the phases, and they're like, well, we don't, and then all of a sudden I get these like really nice polished concept. It's like, well, I didn't need that. I just needed these rough thumbnails, but I never told them what good looks like for concept. So of course, there was miscommunication. So in my world, that happens, across countries and time zones. But I think this process could benefit internal teams to really stick to defining phases and signing off and moving forward on them, and defining what good looks like at each phase to make it very clear. So I'm talking about pre-production budgeting. I'm not necessarily talking about money, but the idea is that you're defining the scope of your project. And you're identifying limits. Is money a limit? Do we have X amount of dollars to make this product? Because that will change what you do in pre-production. That will change what you do in production. How many people do we have at our studio? How many people are around that can help us? That will limit or enable your pre-production and your project. And when I talk about budgeting, we're budgeting pre-production, but we're also budgeting the entire project, and even past launch. I think the idea, I'm hoping that in a proper pre-production, you can think about the pre-production, the full production, and then post-launch as, what's your plan? Is your plan to release, in Overwatch, is your plan to release 2 levels a year? Or is it 4? Or is it 6? Is it 1? Whatever. Define that. Put a line in the sand so that everyone has at least some sort of expectation of what you're doing. Volume, basically just calling out how many assets, how many levels, what's your plan? And again, this sort of goes into the rest of it, about how much time do you have? Do we have to ship by Christmas, or do we have a year and a half? That will change your pre-production, that will change your production. And then simple stuff. This sounds silly, but like think about this ahead of time. I can't tell you how many projects I've been on where we're finalizing the game in the last month and we're going, oh shit, it doesn't fit on the disc. Or we can't ask people to do a 30 gig download. That's not okay. So think about that stuff in pre-production. How many assets can we fit in the memory box that we've defined? And again, it may sound crazy to think about this stuff before you've created anything, but I really think defining the limits helps you be more creative later on, and it helps you stick to a plan. Even if you have to modify it slightly, that's okay. You had a target. All right, and what's the final step of pre-production? To leave pre-production. Get the hell out of pre-production. Answer the questions that you set out to answer, and then get out. Start making your game. Don't hang out in pre-production. If you hang out in pre-production, hoping that you'll come up with the next, I'm gonna borrow a Riot term, but the next genre-defining game, you might get stuck there. I've seen teams get stuck there. I've seen it at Blizzard, I've seen it at Riot, I've seen it at Sony, I've seen it all over. Don't get stuck trying to come up with a perfect game. If you think if you're playing it and you have fun, but you're like, oh, I would want to change, no, start making it, go, you're good. Releasing a B+ game is way better than spending 4 years and never making that maybe A+ game, right? I want to see a B+ game ship, period. And then you can make the sequel to that. Maybe the sequel is A+, whatever. But the idea is to progress forward, don't get stuck in an iteration loop. Because your team will burn out, and that's really bad. All right, so now we answered all the questions we wanted in pre-production. Now we're entering production. Has anyone heard of the concept of Chesterton's fence? Is this familiar to anyone? Okay, so this was introduced to me by an engineer on one of the projects. But the idea with this is you've answered a bunch of questions in pre-production, now you're in production. The concept of Chesterton's fences, and I'll tell the story in the way it was introduced to me, is 2 engineers were walking down a road and they come upon a gate. And the first engineer steps up to the gate and says, well, there's a gate in the road, we should just remove the gate. And the second engineer says, hold on, 1 second, wait a minute. Who put this gate here? Why is it here? What is it doing? We don't know if there's dinosaurs on the other side of that fence. There could be a very valid reason that we want that fence there. Don't knock it down until you know why it was put there, you know what purpose it serves. So I'm kind of using this as an illustration of you've answered a bunch of questions in pre-production, don't then throw those answers away when you enter production. I think that's super important. Even if it's not a perfect answer, do your best to stick to the things that you defined in pre-production because you defined them for a reason. If you all of a sudden start changing things in production, then it has a cascading effect and can have a negative effect on your project because then everything becomes undefined. The whole purpose of pre-production was to define things and move forward, to answer those questions. The next one that I think is super important in production is, okay, you've exited pre-production, you're all excited, you know all the answers, you're ready to build things. I'm going to build 10 levels all at once, or I'm going to build 10 characters or 50 characters, whatever. No, don't, please. It doesn't work that way. It definitely doesn't work in the outsourcing world, and I think on the internal front as well. Build 1 level, build 1 character. Even if you build one in pre-production, build just 1 more in production. See how that goes. Did you run into any problems? Did the tools work the way you thought they would work? Then even build 1 more. Are you running smoothly? Is your engine running great? Then maybe you can build 2 levels in parallel or 2 characters in parallel. But don't start outsourcing yet. Don't add complexity where you don't need it, because if you add volume, if you add complexity too quickly, you will get yourself in trouble. I've seen lots of teams try to handle multiple challenges at once, and sometimes the right answer is just to slow down and focus on 1 challenge at a time. Crawl, walk, run. Once you're walking, once your process is moving, once you look around and no one's freaking out, everyone's going home on time, no one's crunching crazy hours, then you can amp up and you can add complexity. Maybe you can start outsourcing at that point. Maybe you have to do an engine upgrade, whatever. But don't do everything all at once, because you're asking for trouble. The next one is block out all the things. I can't tell you how many times I've seen assets that look so beautiful have to get changed because of design or lighting or tech changes. But make blockouts and then leave them in the game until you love the game, right? I can't tell you how many We came very close in Overwatch to like presentations. Oh, actually, you know what? At the BlizzCon announcement for Overwatch, the playable version, there was blockouts in that demo. But you couldn't see them because they're painted. We put a little bit too much effort into the blockouts. But the point is that don't put enough effort in that you wouldn't mind if someone had to change the size or throw out your UVs or totally trash the textures. Do just enough that you can play the game and have fun, and then leave it there. Let the designers do their thing, and then when you're pretty sure that they're not going to change the level, when you're pretty sure that they're not going to change the animation on the gun, then you can make the handle of the gun super pretty and make the texture really nice. These are just examples of just like super rough blockouts. Whether it's 2D, and the same thing goes for 2D. Don't start painting a beautiful illustration before you do a bunch of thumbnails. It's just asking for trouble, because then all of a sudden you're iterating and you're getting frustrated because someone's asking you to like move characters around and you're like, but I painted this beautiful. No, because until it's locked in, until everyone's happy with the composition or the shape of the object or the gameplay, I would encourage you to leave things in blockout phase. The game will still be fun. You're making the art is the icing on the cake to a fun game, even though I'm an artist. So the next part in production is to stick to your phases. I know this is going to sound crazy, but don't iterate. In production, you should be refining, not iterating. You should have the what good looks like, and you should be slowly progressing your asset to match what the good looks like asset, right? You're not iterating. You're not changing your process. You're not changing the naming convention. You're not changing the shaders or whatever. Try not to iterate. And don't go back a phase. I think this is super important. I've pulled this move on the outsourcing side. I don't see it used much on the internal side. But let's say you get an asset that's like 80% done, and someone wants to change the color or the shape. I've been in a situation where I've gone to the art director and said, listen, let's finish it up the way we've defined it, and then let's put it in game and let's see how we feel about it. So don't back up a phase just because you're looking for that like perfect. Keep going, finish the asset, put it in game, see how it feels, and then make your decision. Because I bet what's going to happen is you'll get it in game and you'll go like, it's not that bad. We don't need to change it. We don't need to iterate for the 6th time. I'm okay with that color. I'm okay with that shape, whatever. And again, it's about not chasing perfection at every little step. There's a cool book that I'll reference here that I'm not going to go into super detail, but I think it's worth reading. It's a little bit intense, but a book called Rework. It covers a little too intense maybe, but a lot of the concept of iteration and how that kills projects and that sort of stuff. I soften that, and I believe in the don't iterate and don't go back a phase, and I keep it at that. But the book is an interesting take. All right, this other concept of future-proofing assets as you build them. Think through the life cycle of your asset. Think through the things that live around your asset. If I'm building 10 cars for a game, if I build the wheels, make sure I build the wheels in a way I can rip them off and use them on the other car without killing memory or pulling or doing 2 texture draws. Because you can literally save yourself from redoing a wheel for 10 cars. You can just do 1 and use it on another one. So modular, even if you're just kit bashing like, hey, I made a bolt. I've got a normal map of a bolt. You can just copy and paste that into all the other ones. You don't need to remake 5 bolts. We had texture sheets of bolts on Overwatch as well that you only made 10 of them. That's all you needed, and you just use those. Wow, that's fast. Holy cow. 5 minutes supposedly. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit quickly, but think about the possible scenarios of this car. I'm going to use the car again. If you go to the designers and say, hey, is the car going to blow up? And they say, nah, it won't blow up. You say, I think it might blow up. So make a little bit of interior to the car. And if you say, oh, it's going to flip over? No, it's not going to flip over. It's like, I'm going to make an underside to that car because it's going to flip over, no matter what the designers tell me. And then don't leave a trail of bugs. Please, dear Lord, do not leave a trail of bugs. Building bug debt is really bad, so clean up as you go. Has anyone ever heard someone say, don't worry, we'll come back and fix it before launch? Has anyone ever heard or said that? shame on you if you've said that. And if you've heard that, no, that's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. We had some really cool, and I keep on going back to Overwatch, but we had some really cool environment artists that we'd sort of joke and we'd say, it's approved. We're going to come back and fix it, but it's probably going to ship that way. And you know what? At the end of the day, you put it in a level and no one notices, and it all works. And so, yeah, we can make it better, but does it really kill the game? Not really. Could we have spent 2 more weeks on an asset? Sure. Yeah, but did it affect it? No. So we'll blow through this really quick. Negotiate with your budget. So you set a budget of time and money and people and all that sort of stuff. You can negotiate this. If you want to add something, that's great, but something has to fall off then. If I set my budget at 10 levels and now I want 12, okay, cool. I've got to cut the number of assets and levels. I've got to make the level smaller. I've got to do something to make that equation balance. All right, next. So this is so between the pre-production sets you up for success, entering production, sticking to your plan, moving forward. Don't get stuck in iteration land again. I think that's one of the main things I want to get across. So now is the interesting nerdy stuff to me, brain science. So we've got art, we've defined it, we've answered all the questions, and we've moved into production. But what was going on that whole time? We have people, we have humans building stuff, and they're not all the same. We're not all the same, and that's okay. But I think as the people that are part of a team, as people that build teams, you have to sort of acknowledge that. And you have to understand how the human dynamic fits into your project. So there's this concept of Dunbar's number. The number of people that you can have, that you can maintain connection with, that you can really work with at any one time without sort of losing, I care about you, So 15 people, sure, that's awesome. That's a small team. It's pretty easy. I know them. I know what they're doing. 50 people, it starts to get tough. It's a little bit tougher. Like maybe I know them, but I know their process, but maybe I don't know everything about them, and that's okay. But we still work together, and we're very conscious of our part of the team and how we operate. So 150 is the line. So 150 people. That's about, supposedly, so based on the Dunbar, all the studies that this guy did and a whole bunch of other stuff that I won't cover, but I encourage you to look up the research for this, but 150 seems to be the limit of, if you go past this number, your team starts to become unstable. I start to lose the connection of, once we hit 500 or 1,500 people, it's like, I don't know that guy. I met him once 6 months ago, but I don't really know him or I'm not connected to him, So when I deliver my thing, my part of the project, maybe it's going to him, but I don't really know what he needs. I haven't talked to him enough. But 150 seems to be the line. So if anyone's building a team, I would encourage you to stay as small as possible. And if you're building a big team, I encourage you not to make a team that goes larger than 150. If you have a company that's bigger than 150, divide it up. Divide it up into 150 autonomous pieces, so that those teams can have that connection, can have that ability to work together in a way that's efficient as possible. All right, and the next one is team personality. I think it's good to acknowledge that we're not all the same, and we operate differently, and there's different ways of measuring that. And so these are 2 examples. Blizzard was big on this thing called the DISC profile. I'll talk a little bit about that after. Riot liked something called the Strength Finder, which is kind of called the Clifton Strengths Assessment. But it's really, these are all sort of scratching at the same concept of who we are at work. How do we operate at work? I'll show you a graph later of who I am, but you shouldn't load up your team with sort of one kind of person, and just the people the thinkers, the craftsmen, like those you should have them, but then you should have other types of personalities to make a healthy team. So, and again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the idea is think about the team that you're building. Think about the personalities of the people that you're bringing onto your team and how they interact with each other. So this was using the Clifton Strength Finder, or Clifton Strength Assessment. This company called Jetcopter, they basically mapped the personalities of their team using that assessment. And again, I don't think any of these assessments are like the end-all assessment. But I think the concept that I'm trying to get across is think about it. And I think as soon as you start to open your mind to that, that's better than not thinking about it and just throwing a bunch of people in a room and asking them to do these assets. So they mapped their company and they said, oh, look, we've got a bunch of people in the top right. We should probably think about that. Maybe we should start hiring people in other quadrants of the behavioral spectrum. Maybe that would help make us a more healthy, balanced team. And then this is the DISC one. So this is the one Blizzard likes a lot. They a pretty formal process for it. You take it with your team. You know, are you the dominance person that just wants decisions, whether it's right or wrong, just go? Are you so I'll go. I is high spirit. Are you the influencer? Right? Are you the C? Are you the person that's gonna like make the right answer no matter what, or are you the steady? So this is welcome to my brain, as much as DISC says. So it says I'm not an influencer. And so the way this measures it is it does it take energy from you or does it give you energy? So my I is super low. So me getting up here, as much like I'm excited about this. I'm happy to be presenting this stuff to you guys. But man, can I tell you this stuff drains me? Like not in a bad way, but you should, if I have a team that needs to do a bunch of presentations, I should not hire a bunch of people that look like this. I should hire people that get energy from this stuff. And you know, I can do about 2 hours of this, and then I just need to lay in my hotel and stare at the ceiling for about 2 hours and just be like, I need to recharge. So, but I'm super high C, so that means I will get you the right answer, but it also means I'm a little bit slow sometimes on making the decision. Anyway, so last one, super quick, and then we'll open up to questions. The last one is I think that we should focus a little more on empathy in the workplace. As managers, as coworkers, as whatever, having empathy offers the team the ability to take risks and has failed. So it opens people up to be creative, to take risks, and for those risks to sometimes fail and for that to be okay. It helps you understand each other's workflow to say, I'm going to deliver this thing to you, and I need to understand what I'm delivering and how you receive it. And then if a problem comes up, it helps me sort of break down the root cause of that problem. Say like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, is there a conflict at work? Is there a conflict at home? But it helps me having empathy and hearing the human there instead of just going, well, you didn't deliver your thing, like you're in trouble now. We're going like, hey man, like what's up? Like, how's it going? What can I do to help? Empathy in the workplace is important. I think it's something that is okay to talk about and okay to train up on and practice and all that sort of good stuff instead of just focusing on the KPIs or that stuff is good, but also don't forget everyone's got this squishy brain. Anyway, I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for having me. This is my contact information. We're open for questions. Thank you guys again.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. Let's take a look at the floor for questions. Do we have any hands in the air?
Questions?
Okay, don't all put your cameras up at once.
Yeah, if you take a picture of this, it gives you my email and LinkedIn profile and that sort of stuff. But yeah, if there's any questions about, like, I can't tell you secrets about the projects I've been part of, but I can tell you about my experience.
Down front.
Maybe if you just yell and I can repeat it.
Oh, okay. Well, my throat is kind of hoarse.
It's all good.
Yeah. So hi. I'm actually from a outsourcing company from Manila, and recently we have this really big project. It's actually our first IP. Now, based from your history, it's kind of similar to what I'm going through. Like I started as a texture artist, and now somehow I'm managing a team of roughly around 25 for that IP. Now, the first thing I noticed during that transition, and this is not saying that outsourcing is bad, but the one thing I noticed is most of us, especially in Manila, I'm not sure here in Kuala Lumpur, but most of us in Manila, we are trained to be outsourcing artists, and that transition, and it's not really a smooth transition on going on to like working an own IP, because that is the part where we started messing up. So, have you experienced anything like that?
Okay, so to repeat the question, so if you're an outsourcing team creating assets and then you transition to creating your own IP, and that's a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen a whole bunch of teams go through that. So you're not alone, which is kind of a good thing. So honestly, about like 50% of the teams that I've seen start from asset generation, like they're helping someone make a bunch of art assets, and then they transition to, hey, I want to make my own game. That's a big transition, and I've seen about 50% of the teams fail. That's actually not. So of the people that I've seen make games, like I worked in Austin, Texas for a long time. Of the people making games in Austin, Texas, like Sony and the big guys, like they would regularly cancel 50% of their projects. So that's scary. Like we would joke about our batting averages being like, oh, if you're above 50%, like you're doing great. Like that's awesome. So that sounds scary, but the thing that I would offer, and the teams that I've seen succeed, do one thing that I think is very interesting, is they do something that's not exciting. So the teams that I've seen succeed are the teams that go, hey, you know what? We want to do our own IP, but to make sure there's a consistent cash flow, we're going to do slot machine stuff, or we're going to do architectural rendering, or we're going to do courtroom crime scene rendering, whatever. Or I've seen people do like visualizations for the military. Anyway, there's tons of stuff out there that's not games, but that's the same skill set, but that's not exciting, but it's consistent. So sometimes I've seen the teams that I've seen succeed are the ones that have that sort of that consistent pipeline of money support coming in, and then it gives them a chance to build up a little reserve of money and then spend that on an IP. Maybe your batting average is still 50-50, but at least when you miss with a project, you don't go out of business. You still have that, you build up the reserve, and then you say, okay, I'm going to try an IP. Ah, shit, that one didn't work. Okay, that's fine. 6 months, we'll save up again, we'll try another one. But the thing that I would recommend, and I don't think it's a silver bullet, but I would take a look at other industries for a consistent cash flow for you to take risks on games. I mean, I think games like movies, like anything creative, is going to be risky. Like you're going to have an idea and it's going to be exciting, but maybe a million people don't think it's exciting, but maybe 20 million do, and that'd be awesome. But you don't know. Like it's hard to tell sometimes. So build up a safety net, have a consistent money cash flow system. That's not the risky entertainment business. I think that's the sort of the advice that I'd offer.
Okay, thank you.
Cool, thank you.